All Alice wanted was to reconnect with Miracle, her favorite lion. The last time she saw him was 8 years ago, and she was hoping to continue from where she left off. However, when the lion finally saw her, he gave a shocking reaction. It was a cool evening when Alice returned to the reserve for the first time in 8 years. Her heart was beating steadily in her chest, and her fingers were trembling with nervousness as she thought about Miracle, her favorite lion. The last time she saw him was 8 years ago, when she had been forced to leave him behind, despite how much she had come to love him. However, she was back now, and as she approached his cage, she prayed fervently that Miracle would be just as glad to see her as she was to see him. Still, she couldn't mask the fear that was pumping steadily through her veins. She was terrified that Miracle had changed in a way she didn't expect. The manager of the reserve escorted her to his den. It was a bit secluded from the pride, and the manager explained that it was because Miracle simply refused to socialize with other lions and was always on his own. The manager then confessed that Miracle had never been the same since Alice left. Besides being less social, he also became aggressive and incredibly territorial, even to other lions. Few people could get into his den to bring him food as he guarded it jealously. For the caretakers to feed him, they had to create a system that didn't involve them getting too close to the animal because they couldn't guarantee their safety. All this information hurt Alice a lot. She couldn't believe that Miracle had gotten that bad, and she felt partly responsible. She knew that if she had not gone off the way she did, Miracle would have ended up much better. But she couldn't change the past, only improve the present. Now that she was back, he was the first animal she wanted to see. Not just because she had missed him and wanted to run her fingers through his soft, silky fur once again, but also because she wanted to reignite her friendship with the lion. She wanted to rekindle what they had 8 years ago, or at the very least continue from where they left off. However, she couldn't help but think that it was all wishful thinking. She knew that as much as she herself had changed over the past 8 years, Miracle had changed just as much. It was possible that he was no longer the lion she had known. He could have forgotten her totally, or even worse, become too aggressive for her. Their friendship didn't just start out of the blue. It was born out of a kind heart and a genuine wish to do good. Alice found the lion when he was nothing but a cub. She had gone hiking then, and as a staff of the reserve and an avid lover of nature, she always preferred to take her long walks in the woods. She knew all the safe trails and paths to ensure she didn't run into any wild animals. However, one day during her hiking session, she stumbled on a cub by the side of the path. The cub was injured. He looked like he had been attacked. One of his legs was broken, and he also had a gash along the side of his belly. He was whimpering in pain, and every sound he made was like a punch to Alice's gut. She knew that with such injuries, he wouldn't last long at all, especially out in the woods. She also knew that the lioness that gave birth to the cub must be long gone and the tiny thing was on his own. So it was all up to her to rescue the animal. She did just that, gently picking him up and holding him in her arms like she would a baby. Then she hurried back the way she had come and went straight to the vet. Once there, his treatment began. The vet gave the cub painkillers and started treating his wound to avoid infections. All through the process, Alice remained with the cub. It was also easy to see that the cub had taken a liking to her as well. He had his paws wrapped around her finger and held on tightly to it, unwilling to let her go. It was as if he saw her as a safe space, and as long as she was beside him, he would never be hurt again. His actions melted her heart. She couldn't begin to imagine what the cub would have gone through while stuck on the footpath, writhing in excruciating pain. She promised him that she was going to personally see to it that he received all the treatment he needed so he would be healthy like every other lion in the reserve. It took a few weeks, but eventually the cub was discharged from the clinic. By then, he was a totally different animal from the pitiful creature Alice had rescued all those days ago. He loved to play so much. He was always running all over the place. He would try to roar and then roll on the ground so Alice could rub his belly. Alice couldn't help but laugh. She could see how cheerful the cub was, and it made her happy that she was instrumental in helping him recover. Everything that had to do with the cub was miraculous. How he managed to get himself to the footpath despite being injured, how she stumbled on him and rushed him to the vet, and how he managed to recover all his injuries. It all seemed like a series of miracles, and it inspired her to name him so because she saw him as one. With him out of the clinic, he was placed with the other lions in the reserve. He was a bundle of joy, and by then, Alice had fallen in love with him. She opted to be his caretaker and was given full responsibility for him. This was a duty she took to heart. Not a day went by that she didn't spend at least a few hours with Miracle. Mornings were always his best parts of the day, because that was usually when Alice clocked in at the reserve. However, evenings were his least favorite, because that was when Alice had to return home. They spent so much time together growing and having fun. The bigger he got, the more careful Alice realized she had to be. He was becoming a full-grown lion, and she couldn't continue rolling around with him due to his weight. By then, when he roared, the grounds of the reserve shook terribly, and the birds in the trees took to flight. She was so proud of him and how far he had come. However, suddenly something happened that threatened their bond. One night, while Miracle was asleep in his corner of the reserve, a cobra slithered into his den. The snake had escaped from its tank and somehow found its way to Miracle's lair. The snake's hissing woke the lion up at once, and what followed immediately was an epic battle for survival. The snake lunged at the lion, but with a roar that shook the immediate environs, he jumped out of the way. The roar alerted the staff on night duty, and they immediately began to run towards Miracle's den. The snake wrapped itself around the body of the lion, and with a hiss, sank its fangs into Miracle's calf. With another roar, Miracle rolled on the ground, dislodging the snake and sending it flying. The snake returned for another attack and flew at the lion, who simply moved out of the way and caught the head in his jaws. This was a major blow to the cobra, almost paralyzing it completely. Releasing the snake, Miracle tried to return to sleep, but he staggered once and then fell to the ground in a faint. The snake's venom was already spreading through his system. Just then, the staff burst into the den and managed to get the snake out. Miracle was almost unconscious then and couldn't even move a muscle as he was carried on a stretcher and rushed to the clinic. That night, a call was placed to Alice informing her of the tragic occurrence. She immediately got out of bed and rushed to the clinic to be with him. It was a terrifying moment for them. The venom had spread fast, and Miracle was in excruciating pain. Unfortunately, the reserve was all out of antivenom for this specific species of cobra, and the painkiller the vet was administering wasn't working. They needed to prepare a new dose of antivenom, but that was going to take at least one entire day, and with every second that passed, Miracle's condition worsened. As the venom started attacking Miracle's vital organs, the staff began to realize that they wouldn't get the antidote on time. The manager of the reserve called Alice aside and spoke to her. He knew how much the lion meant to her, which was the reason he was running his idea by her first. He wanted them to put Miracle down. He was in too much pain, and he wasn't going to last until the antidote was ready. The manager preferred the lion get a peaceful passing rather than a painful and chaotic one. However, Alice refused. She told her boss that Miracle was a fighter and he would pull through. If he was weak, he would have died all those years ago when she found him injured and battered on the footpath. She assured the manager that Miracle would survive until the antidote was ready. The night passed and Miracle was still unconscious. They had to connect an EKG machine to his body so they could read his vitals. That was the only way they could tell he was still alive. Without the antidote, there was ridiculously little that they could do except do their best to keep him comfortable, even though that didn't seem to make any difference. The following morning, the antidote was ready. The vet administered it the moment it was taken to his clinic. It was a fast-acting antidote and immediately began working to counteract the effects of the venom. For the next couple of days, Alice and her colleagues waited with bated breath as the vet treated Miracle for hours on end. The caretaker was terrified. She had done so much with the lion and wasn't ready to lose him just yet. She could still think of a number of things she wanted to do with her favorite cat. A week later, the vet announced that Miracle was stable and he was going to be fine. The lion remained at the clinic for a few weeks before he was discharged. The day he got out, he was the happiest lion in the world. He rolled and ran all over the reserve, jumping up and down and scaring off the zebras. Alice was so happy to see it. She was right when she called him a fighter. She was glad that the lion was still living up to his name. Everything was going great, but little did she know that fate had yet another tragic twist in store for her. While her life at the reserve had returned to normal, the same could not be said for her life at home. Alice's husband, Brian, was a prosecutor. He was known all over the country for being strict when it came to sending criminals to prison, and he had the highest number of convictions in the entire state. However, this time he sent the leader of a dangerous criminal enterprise to prison and got him the maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The criminal's brother then vowed to take revenge by taking his life and that of his family. This was a major threat, and both Brian and the cops knew that they would keep it. So they immediately began to make plans to get Brian and his family out to safety. They were given 3 days to wrap up their lives and get ready to move. This came as a huge shock to Alice. She had built so much in the city and couldn't imagine leaving it all. She couldn't imagine leaving Miracle behind either. However, her life was the most important. She knew she had to go no matter what. She planned to spend the next day with Miracle and say her proper goodbye because she had no idea when she would see him again. Sadly, she never even got to say goodbye. That very night, the cops got wind of an imminent attack on Brian and his family and immediately fast-tracked their relocation. They couldn't wait for the planned date. Brian and Alice ran away with only as much as they could carry. They were taken to a safe house and given new identities to make sure that they were never found. That singular act saved their lives. Brian and Alice lived in the safe house for the next 8 years. They lived life undercover while waiting for the all-clear to return to the world. While Alice was able to get another job to keep busy and earn some money, she never forgot about Miracle. He was on her mind at all times. She wondered what he ate, which lioness he was courting, and if he was sad that she wasn't with him anymore. She swore that when it was all over, he would be the first she would go and see. Finally, 8 years after they left their home and ran for their lives, Brian and Alice received word that all members of the criminal enterprise had been arrested, including the brother who threatened Brian and his family. They had all been sent to prison where they would never threaten anyone ever again. This was a welcome development, and Alice received it gladly. She was so happy to return to her life. Living in a safe house had its perks, but she preferred living her life without having to look over her shoulder for monsters. She and Brian returned to their home, ready to resume their lives from where they left off 8 years ago. The very next day, she went straight to the reserve to see Miracle. She had chosen to go in the evening because she knew that would be after he had his meal and he would be ready to play with her. Now, as she stood at the entrance of Miracle's den, her heart thudded heavily in her chest and she swallowed. The manager asked her to give up and come back out, but she refused. She wanted to see for herself if Miracle had truly forgotten about her or not. She slowly walked in, one hesitant foot before the other. The second that Miracle sensed her presence, she knew it. The huge body of the lion tensed, and she felt goosebumps break out all over her skin. Then, with a grunt, the lion slowly pushed himself to his feet, stretching his body as he turned to face her. In the moment their eyes met, it was as if Alice's heart had stopped beating. She could barely recognize Miracle in them. He no longer looked like the cheerful and happy lion that she left behind. His eyes looked sad, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of getting angry. She was terrified, but she stood her ground as she remembered all her training. She refused to look or act scared, even though she felt it. Instead, she spoke calmly to the lion, keeping her voice low, as if it was meant for only his ears. "It's me, Miracle. Do you remember me? I'm Alice." Miracle watched her for a while, and then all of a sudden, his body tensed up and he leaned backward. A gasp of horror filtered through the crowd of onlookers. Even Alice felt her spirit leave her body because that was a move all of them were familiar with. Miracle was getting ready to jump. He was going to attack her. At once, the manager ordered that Alice be gotten out of the den and Miracle be given a tranquilizer so he didn't hurt her. However, before any of those orders could be followed, the lion launched himself into the air towards Alice. She staggered backward in horror, a scream escaping her lips. The lion landed on the ground a few feet away and walked towards her. She kept staggering backward until she tripped over a stone and fell to the ground, drawing another collective gasp from the onlookers. Miracle came up to her and stood over her, staring down at her panicked face. Then he slowly lowered his big head to her face and began to lick it. For the first few seconds, Alice was sure she was dreaming it all. Yet she could feel his wet and slimy tongue on her face, and she realized at once that she wasn't imagining it. Miracle remembered her. With a loud laugh, she sat up from the ground and hugged him tightly. He was so big that her arms couldn't go around his body, but she didn't mind. She cried as she realized just how much she had needed him to remember her. "I'm so sorry for leaving you. I'm sorry for not saying goodbye." She wept against his body, his thick fur soaking up her tears. "But I'm here now. I'm here for you, and nothing is going to separate us again." All around them, the onlookers began to clap. At first, it was just one person, then someone else joined in, and soon everyone was clapping. This was one of the most remarkable reunions they had ever witnessed between an animal and a human. They were deeply touched by the bond Miracle and Alice shared, and they loved the fact that even with 8 years gone by, that bond could still be felt. It was beautiful. Alice was glad about how things turned out with Miracle. She became his caretaker again, and they began to spend just about every day together. Miracle's attitude improved drastically within the next few days. He ate with more gusto and began to relate well with other lions in the pride. Now that he knew that Alice was with him once again, he was sure that he was safe and could do anything he wanted to do. What a beautiful story. Who would have guessed that Miracle would remember her after 8 years? What would you have done in Alice's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Be sure to hit a like and subscribe button. See you in the next video.